The 534th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year, the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome in to another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you on a Friday night. Here to do what's always the worst edition of the show every year. And that's when you talk about a loss at end your season. And that's the task at hand as Carolina falls to Ole Miss 71-64 in the first round of the NCAA Tournament, ending the 2024-2025 season a whole lot sooner than I anticipated back in the preseason and a lot earlier than we anticipated once we got into the postseason because this team was playing well. They were looking like a team that could make a lot of noise as a double-digit seed. And that simply is not the case. It was not meant to be. We are sitting here 2.5 hours, I think, after the game goes final, and still processing it because there's a lot to talk about just from the game itself. Obviously, the storied career for one of my favorite Tar Heels of all time has come to an end. And while it's, 5-10 years ago, you wouldn't speculate what's next. We'll sit here and speculate what's next for this program because the portal opens on Monday, and you expect Carolina to be active in terms of finding players in it while also seeing players enter it themselves as this roster will begin its overhaul for the upcoming season. So a lot to talk about. It's going to be an emotional pod. I don't know if I can talk about RJ's final game and not break down. And that's okay. This is what the NCAA tournament brings. I don't think there's another sport, maybe the NFL, because you're one and done there, where the finality of your season comes to an end. It just hits you, and it's earth-shattering. It's soul-crushing because of what the tournament provides, the highs and the lows. And, Carolina experienced, I think, a tournament's worth in today's game. That's the thing. There were some really, really highs. There were some really, really lows and a lot in between. But ultimately, it was a game that summarized this season. Carolina gets punched in the mouth early. They trail by as many as 22 in the game. They trailed by 18 at halftime. But like they have done in virtually every loss this year where they dug themselves a big hole, This team was there with a minute to go, down 2 after RJ converted a 3-point play, 66-64. You think, you get a stop. Carolina's going to get a bucket. They're either going to win in regulation or go to overtime. Sean Padula hits a 3 for Ole Miss, and they're able to control out the final 50-some-odd seconds to go on to win the game. And so got to credit Ole Miss. They played really well. They played like the team that we saw beat Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee in the SEC portion of their regular season. But I think this is one that, as much as you can credit the opponent, there's a lot of blame to go around on Carolina's end because they weren't ready to play. And as much as they were able to get back in the game, if they play the last 8 minutes for the entire 40 minutes, we're probably sitting here talking about a different outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically exactly what we saw in just about every other game this season that Carolina lost. They just didn't get out to the start that they needed to. And, ultimately they end up racing back. And that's great, man. That you love to see the fight from this team. But, that can't be the standard for Carolina. It's got to be that you fight back into these games and you win. But the first half, I mean, it was just a really, really rough scene to see them just fall apart on both ends of the floor. And Hubert Davis said, I hadn't seen this since Clemson. Really, I got to be honest, I think you saw it in the game in the ACC semifinals against Duke. But maybe it was different. Maybe he felt like there was something that Carolina was doing on one end of the floor that was better than what we saw in this game, which was just, at times a complete catastrophe for Carolina. I mean, just a lack of communication. That was what he said. And I do think that was certainly something that you could point to, was that the basics simply weren't getting done. Carolina was not communicating on the defensive end. It allowed for a lot of easy shots from the outside for Ole Miss early in the game, let them settle into a rhythm, and then there was really nothing that Carolina could do about it. And then offensively, Carolina's offense just became stagnant again. And credit to Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss did a fantastic job most of the day of, making it difficult for Carolina to get to the lane. That was one of the things that we were hoping Carolina would be able to do, especially Seth Trimble get to that foul line. And they did as the game went along. But early on, Carolina was just settling for a lot of shots from the perimeter or even inside the arc, some of those mid-range shots that simply weren't going down. I thought their shot selection was incredibly poor early in the game. It got better as the game went along. But the ultimate undoing, I think, for Carolina was that they had so many easy lay-ins and just could not finish at the rim when they needed to. They were 11 of 24 on layups in this game. That simply cannot happen in a game of this magnitude against an opponent that is as good as Ole Miss. And that's the thing. We talked a lot about how we thought Carolina was going to win this game, how we thought Carolina was the better team in this game. But Ole Miss is a really, really good basketball team, and you needed to do all of those things that Carolina didn't do in the first half. You needed to do those if you were going to beat this team. We thought this was going to be a track meet, and for the longest time, it looked like you had gone to a track meet with Ole Miss, and you simply had not shown up. And so, that's something that you really have to take a serious look at if you're Carolina and try to figure out why exactly that's happening. I think it's more specific to this group than it is to Coach Davis and his staff. I think that there was, just a lack of a communicator on the floor that could really get Carolina back on track when something went wrong. But yeah, this is something that they got to figure out moving forward, because this is a concerning trend that happened all season long. And it's only fitting that this is how the season ends. Carolina battles their way back into a game, but it just simply isn't enough when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think there were some things that happened early that really determined and dictated the outcome of this game. I think you start with just the fact that they hit 4 threes by the first media timeout. They hit, I think, 6 of their first 7 threes. We knew that they could be prolific from three, but I don't even think Carolina was prepared for them to come out that red hot. The foul trouble had been an Elliott Cadeau thing for this team all year long. Today it was Van Allen Lubin. And to think about just how far Van Allen Lubin came this year is remarkable. A guy that got added, back late in the transfer portal cycle a year ago, and excuse me, not until conference play really doesn't establish himself as the best big for Carolina, and was just so important and so vital for this team. Um, Jalen Washington was a guy today that just did not meet the moment, did not meet the physicality that tournament play requires and demands. I mean, he got bullied on the court, guys. That was the equivalent of, that kid in high school or middle school was getting picked on and getting shoved in lockers. Like, that's what happened to him. There were 2 times he got driven straight at, got bumped, and he went flailing 5 to 10 feet out of the way. And gave up layups, dunks, whatever. That's not good enough, man. And it's not. I mean, Hubert Davis had to do what he had to do because he had to manage the foul situations for Van Allen Lubin. But I thought losing Lubin was really key, was really important, in a negative way for Carolina. And then I think it was, just not being able to get something to string together positively. Like, it was just one of those first halves where Carolina could not do one thing well consistently. Like, Ole Miss missed their final 7 shots of the first half. That took over 3 minutes of the game. Carolina didn't trim the lead. Like, and you're down 18. You hold a team without a field goal made for over 3 minutes. You should be able to trim a lead, a deficit. And Carolina could not do that. And I think that was, again, another thing that was about this team was how inconsistent they were within the same frame of a game where they would play really high level defense but not be able to score the basketball, or they would score the basketball and not be able to get any stops. I think you saw a little bit of that today. I think you got to credit Hubert Davis, from 2 guys that would almost get mad at Roy Williams for calling timeouts. He had to call a timeout right away because his team was down 11-2 and was on the verge of having happened to them what ended up happening, which was they were going to get blown out. They were going to get ran out of the gym. He tried different lineups. He tried to combat, tried the full court press or whatever. I think Ole Miss was very much well prepared for that. But far too many times we've seen Carolina not come out, not be ready to play, have to get punched in the mouth for 20 minutes, go into the locker room, and something change. And kind of like the Duke game, it wasn't immediate before this game turned. It was about the 12-minute mark where Carolina really dug in and started to make it a game. And which just goes to show you that, every team desires to play 40 minutes. Every coach desires for his team to play 40 minutes. It's a hard thing to do. There are only a handful of teams in the country that can play 40 minutes. You look at what happened to Clemson yesterday. If Clemson plays 10 minutes of basketball the way they played the final 5 minutes, they win the ball game. If Carolina today plays 16 minutes the way they played the final 12, they win the ball game. But they weren't capable of doing that. And kind of like it was in the Duke game, it was really Seth Trimble leading the charge late in the second half where he went into this mode where I'm going to make as many plays as possible. I think getting them into the bonus really helped because then they knew they could drive and at least get to the foul line. Even though they missed a lot of points. They left a lot of points at the foul line in the first half, but it was just kind of it was so similar to the Duke game that it's not even funny, where you got bodied, you come back, and then the only difference was you didn't have a lane violation that cost you the game. It was just the other team made a play, and so I go back to the Kansas game when we got on here and I said, I don't know how good this team is going to be ultimately. I can't tell you how good we're going to be, but I can tell you that we're going to fight. And there is something to be said about being proud of that, because I don't know how many teams could get down by as many double-digit deficits as Carolina did this year and consistently come back and fight and make it a game. But this team did, and it's okay to be proud of that, while also pointing out the fact that that's not what we're about here. Yep. We're not a moral victory program. This is about winning. And the simple truth of the matter is Carolina did not win enough this season. And going out in the first round is not acceptable here. And so for as good of a vibe as we had entering tonight's game, I think we're sitting here with an empty feeling, because this feels like a lost season for Carolina, for a program that started preseason top 10 that's going out the first weekend of the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely has to have that feel. And I mean, when you have the expectations that this program has, I mean, there's nothing that you would expect less if you exit in the first round of the tournament. I know that, but at some point in the season here, pretty much just became, hey, if you make the tournament, you make the tournament, and that would be considered somewhat successful. But when you look back on it, I mean, the entire season, I mean, this team came into the year preseason top 10, and they end up exiting in the first round of the NCAA tournament to a team that was not more talented than them. I'm sorry. I think Ole Miss has some talented players. I think that they are a really well-coached team under Chris Beard, and I think they do some really good things. On paper, that's not a more talented roster than Carolina had this season. And yet, for some reason, because of the fact that this team can't start games quickly, they lack the confidence and they lack the leadership on the court that they needed. That's why Carolina is sitting where they are right now. And it's damning to think that, this season really was that close. I mean, there were, if you turn around the results of Carolina in those games where they end up coming back, I mean, how good is Carolina? They're one of the better teams in the entire country. But unfortunately, this is exactly what, you would say was almost impossible. There's no way that every single game but one breaks the way that it does for Carolina, where they fight their way back into it, but ultimately they don't make enough plays down the stretch to be able to win it. But that's where we're at, man. We're talking about the UCLA game is the one game where Carolina fought back into it and made all of the plays that they needed to down the stretch. Every other game that they did this, they simply weren't able to close the deal. And so, it's hard to sit here and think that, if one or two of those games goes differently, who knows where Carolina's at. They would have had a much better seed if Carolina ends up, with one of those in the regular season, or even both of those coming in the regular season. Carolina could have been a team that, was on the 8 line or 7 line, something like that, with a much more attractive matchup. But instead, they faced the first 4 matchup against San Diego State, and they looked great. And that's the other thing that just doesn't make sense, is you looked so great in that game. You were fired up. You wanted to prove to the rest of the country that you deserve to be in the NCAA tournament. And yet today, when you started that game, it looked like that energy was gone. It looked like a team, honestly, that was tired, that looked exhausted. And I just don't understand how this team looks exhausted based off of that game that they played against San Diego State. I mean, most of you guys that are starters were out of the lineup relatively early, and they were getting some of the backup players on the floor. But I mean, this group just looked so out of it. They looked like they didn't know what hit them. And that's something that you've got to get figured out this offseason is how can you avoid those moments? And again, I think it's as easy as finding a leader on the court. I think that's what Carolina lacked this year. I think that vocal leader, that extension of Hubert Davis was not there. And you can get on RJ as much as you want to and say that he should have been the guy that stepped up and have been that guy. But I mean, there are so many other guys on this team that could have done that as well. So if you're going to get on RJ, you have to get on Seth Trimble. You have to get on Elliot Cadeau, on Vin Allen Lubin, those types of guys. This was the quietest group, as Hubert Davis said himself many times, the quietest group that he had ever coached. And that became really obvious today when you start to see this team not communicating on the floor and really just falling apart early in the game, and then having to recollect itself, rely on Hubert Davis to get them going in the locker room so that they could come out and start the second half fast. That just can't happen, man. You've got to be able to do it on the court. And so I think that's ultimately what is the undoing of Carolina here and the reason why we're sitting here talking about a loss.
Yeah, I do think there was a leader that I think if he's back on the roster next year, I think Seth Trimble really grew into that. You listen to his post-game interview, there was leadership that was being displayed. I think it's just a guy that'll be more comfortable next year with him if he's back. And that's the thing is that we don't know who's gonna be back and who's not. I mean, Trimble entered the portal just a year ago, came back. He's gonna be pursued, but I do think that's a guy that grew into that leadership role. But I do think, and this isn't a criticism of RJ, but assuming that Trimble's back, and I want to make it very clear, I want him back. We need him back. I want him back. I think he's become a fan favorite with just, the way that he plays, competes. I think he's a good role model in the community. I think he's embodies a lot of the things that we say about RJ. He's the perfect example of what you want a Carolina basketball player to be. I think he would benefit from having RJ moved on to where he could finally feel like locker room is his, backcourt is his, whatever. Because you look at the guy and when he talked to the media, that's the guy, and RJ processing differently, visibly frustrated. I mean, emotional to the point of tears. And so, but none of that matters if it's not being done on the court from start to finish. And that's what Carolina did not have this year. And it's why I loved last year's team the way that I loved last year's team. No, that team didn't win a national championship, but it's one of my favorite Tar Heel teams of all time because they played with such a competitive spirit. Kind of like what you see with Duke this year, man, where that team, every time they took the floor, they competed. You never questioned it. Hubert said in his post-game presser today, he thought that we had outgrown that. He thought that was behind us, and sadly, unfortunately, that was not the case. And the reason why it's evident to where Carolina wasn't competing is because once they competed, look what happened to the game. Look what happened to the scoreboard. It changed, drastically. There are some times where you're playing hard and you're competing, but the other team is just, having its night. There's nothing you can do. And you could say that for the first 6-7 minutes of the game for Ole Miss, where everything they threw up, went in the basket. But you're talking about a team that ultimately shot just 45% from three. And look, they started 6 of 7 from, or 44% from the field. They started 6 of 7 from three. Guys, they finished 9 of 20. So the percentage is still impressive, but that's because you start 6 of 7. they did revert back to the team that we had seen them be at for the majority of the season. Outside of the one thing that I think really took me by surprise is the way that, I mean, they bodied Carolina on the glass, 40-34 today. And at one point it was, I think, 12-3, and Carolina never recovered. They were even on the defensive or the offensive glass at 9, but Ole Miss was +6 in the defensive glass. We talked so much about that going into the game. But again, that's where I look at not having Van Allen Lubin on the court really killed Carolina. Like, we spent so much time in November and December complaining about not having a big man, not having size, not having all that type of stuff. Van Allen Lubin became a guy that really, hit a lot of deficiencies and really was getting the most out of what his body and what his frame would allow him to do. You can't say that about Jalen Washington. And Ty Claude, I mean, we knew when he transferred in late last year was never going to have a consistent role on this team. Carolina was basically functioning with two bigs. And with the way that Jalen Washington played in the first half today, it was basically just no bigs, which is why you saw Jalen Withers at the 5 doing some stuff this year, like in terms of shot selection. Man, we ain't never seen Jalen Withers catch the ball at the foul line and shoot a turnaround jump shot. But when you're down 18 and you're trying to get back into the game, those are the shots that you end up having to take because in that moment you feel like you got to do everything on your own, and which is impossible to do. But that's the way these athletes' minds are wired these days. So, there's a lot of blame to go around tonight. There's a lot of, hey, tip your cap to the other team. But ultimately, when you're there with a minute to go and you got a chance to win, to not come out victorious ultimately is the disappointing result that Carolina is facing with right now. And unfortunately, that result ends its season. Take a look at the box score here. Carolina shoots 38% from the field. They were 24 of 63. On the other hand, Ole Miss shot 44% from the field. They were 24 of 54. Carolina had a bad shooting night from 3, just 5 of 24, 21%. So the three-point shooting team we saw back the majority of the year. As I mentioned, though, Ole Miss goes 8 for 20 from behind the three-point line. That's 20%. The Heels 11 of 16 from the foul line, 69%. Ole Miss 15 of 23 for 65. We just mentioned the rebounding, 40-34 in favor of Ole Miss. Carolina had 17 assists on 24 made baskets. Ole Miss 13 assists on their 24 made baskets. Carolina 9 turnovers that led to 10 points. They forced 14 turnovers, but only scored 16 points off of them. Carolina had the advantage in fast break points, 11-4. Ole Miss had the advantage in points in the paint, 34-32. And the largest lead in the game was Ole Miss, who led by as many as 22. Excuse me. Carolina never led in tonight's ball game. Let's now get to the quote of the game, which is going to come from Seth Trimble, and it'll probably set the scene for maybe some of the emotions that this podcast will bring out of at least me and maybe even Anthony. But after the game, Trimble, RJ Davis at the podium, they fielded questions from Hubert from the media before Hubert Davis did, and it was a great question, an interesting question. Seth Trimble was asked, what all did he learn about how to be a college basketball player at Carolina during his time sharing the backcourt with RJ Davis?
What have you learned in observing RJ and how to be a successful college basketball player at a major program?
I've learned so much from RJ. The second I stepped on campus, he was there. I asked him, hey, can we work out in the summer? I basically asked, hey, can I follow you? Hey, can I do everything that you do? And I'm fortunate enough for him to just accept me such an early time and just share with me all the knowledge that he's shared over the years. I've learned how to be a better leader. I've learned how to be a more confident basketball player. Yeah, I've learned a whole lot from RJ. real fortunate for. So, yeah.
We've had to come on here at different times this year more so than last year and other years specifically on the pod and come to the defense of RJ Davis because this is a guy that was getting a lot of criticism, a lot of flack that quite frankly wasn't warranted. He's not the reason Carolina lost today individually. I mean, it's a collective issue. He was part of a team that got beat. He's not the problem. And I can maybe count on one hand how many times that Carolina lost a game that you can maybe blame RJ Davis for that reason. You want to know what he means to that locker room. That answer right there sums it up. Those guys love RJ.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I think Hubert Davis loves RJ and the coaching staff loves RJ, the guys on the court love RJ as well. And when he announced his decision to come back a year ago, which was fun, it was a lot of excitement and joy. We put a lot of pressure on Hubert Davis and the staff to put together a roster that could compete for a national championship. They ultimately failed in that category. This roster was not equipped to get back to the Final Four or win a national title, and that's disappointing. I have dreaded this podcast since that moment in May because the reality was that Carolina wasn't going to win a national title. That's just the reality of the situation. Only one team gets to do it. It's incredibly hard. If last year's team couldn't do it, what was going to make you think this year's team was going to do it? And we've seen how many good Carolina teams not win a national championship, let alone get to a Final Four. But I have dreaded this. It was my biggest fear last week being at the ACC tournament. Yep. Which was potentially watching him play his final game. And that's what happened today. We watched him play his final game. And there was some vintage RJ stuff where, after Carolina gets down 11-2, he hits a 3. He hits a tough step back 2. The and one at the end of the game where he makes it a one possession or a 2-point game. Tough drive, tough finish, hard foul. The guy makes the play that he has to make to give his team a chance. And that's just who he is. That's who he was. Every time that he was on the floor, and Isaac Shade, a good friend of the pod, put this out. There were 175 games Carolina played during his 5 years. RJ Davis was dressed for 175. Did not miss a single one of them. And every time he took the court for those 175 times, he gave Carolina a chance. And that's all you can ask. We demand winning here. We expect winning here. But all you can really ask for is a chance to win. And I don't know if a player outside since Marcus Page, if I knew every time I took the floor we had a chance to win, have I felt that way outside of RJ Davis? I knew every time he walked on the court, I had a chance because of that kid. And to hear Seth Trimble talk about him the way he talked about him makes me feel good. Because it validates the feelings I have about RJ Davis that they are extended well beyond this fan base and they permeate inside that locker room.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. This is truly one of the program legends and a guy that we should be praising at every turn, especially now moving forward. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. Because I think that people just love to be critical. I mean, people were getting on him today when he was one of the few guys that was really busting his rear end the entire game. Yeah, there were some lapses on the defensive end of the floor that looked like it could have involved him, but a lot of that probably is just the lack of communication. This seems like a guy that every time that he took the floor, he was there to win. And you're talking about one of the greatest scorers that we have ever seen in Carolina history. He gave them a chance because of the way that he scored the basketball. And you go back and look at what he did. Really, I mean, he did it again this year to a certain extent. He started getting more help towards the end of the year, but because it wasn't nearly as flashy, because he wasn't a guy that was playing at an All-American level, they won't talk about it. Really, the last 3 years, he carried this team. 2023, I say, and I will say this until the day that I die, that team makes the NCAA tournament if he does not hurt his index finger. Because the way that he was playing, he was playing at an All-American level down the stretch of that season. And he was ready to take this team into the NCAA tournament by himself. Last year, the reason that Carolina was where they were at was because of R.J. Davis. Yes, you had Harrison Ingram that certainly helped. Cormac Ryan, who did some things as well, both offensively and on the defensive end, really just intensity-wise. And, of course, along the way, for all those years outside of this year, you had Armando Bacot. But this was the heart and soul of the team. This was the guy that every time that his teammates took a look around, they knew RJ was going to be ready to go. Now it's just about us getting ourselves ready to go. And, unfortunately for this year's team, it just didn't seem like they could really get themselves going around him. It took a long time into the season to really get comfortable with a rotation. And people can criticize Hubert Davis and say that he should have went to the bigger lineup earlier. Here's the thing. Those guys weren't justifying playing that bigger lineup earlier in the season. It was really, we're relying on RJ Davis. And I think that was a big part of the reason why this season did not go the way that it was supposed to. I think that the guys almost relied a little bit too much on, hey, we've got RJ Davis out there. He's going to carry us every game. And it's like, yeah, that's great, but the opponent knows that as well, and they're going to game plan for that. So you have to be ready, and you have to be able to counter that. Today, I think, if you look at this performance, I know there are going to be people that are going to criticize this one. I will easily take the performance that he had today to go out on rather than what happened last year against Alabama. What that game was against Duke ultimately, where he was pretty quiet. This is the type of performance that I will take from him as he goes on his way out. But when it comes to what are you going to remember from him? I'm going to remember, the games like what we saw the other night in Dayton, where he scored 26 points and carried this team to victory. I'm going to remember the game in the Smith Center that all of us will remember, where he went off against Miami, scored a record 42 points in the Smith Center. Like, that is the thing that you should remember about RJ Davis, is that he was a guy that laid it on the line for his team, and he was truly one of the most talented scorers that we have ever seen come through Carolina. Yes, there were a couple of disappointing seasons that he was a part of, but this was a dude that also, you look at what he had to go through when he first got to campus. He could have easily bolted from Carolina. When he gets to campus, you are recruited by Roy Williams and he ends up leaving. It's easy for you to say, you know what, I'm out. That offseason, it would have made a lot of sense if he said, this is enough for me. Especially because of, having to go through COVID and what was an extremely difficult time around the program. He decided to stick it out and go through the transition with Hubert Davis. And he was a big part of the reason why in 21-22, Carolina was as successful as they were. You go back to that tournament run, and he had the game against Marquette where he really carries Carolina. Then you go and he says, well, I'm going to take it a step further in the game against Baylor, where you have Brady Manick get ejected. You have Caleb Love foul out, and we're sitting there saying to ourselves, how in the world are we going to find a way to win this game? And RJ Davis just kept making shot after shot. Those are the moments that you should remember from a kid that clearly played for the name on the front of his jersey, not on the back. And I hope that's what people will remember. And the good news is that, yes, this is the last time that we're going to see him in a Tar Heel uniform. But this is not the last time that we're going to see him. He will be honored like so many greats before him. His number will be not only up in the rafters, his number will be retired. Nobody will wear the number 4 moving forward. And we will have that special moment where we get to celebrate that with him at some point here in the near future. So, yes, while today is somber and you hate to see the end of his career, just know that this is a guy that's going to be memorized as one of the great Tar Heels of all time, like he deserves to be.
You know, I've said this a couple times. You know, when Roy Williams retired, I really questioned what my fandom would look like moving forward. Because my connection to Carolina basketball was Roy Williams. It was the only coach I'd ever known. Like, obviously, love, respect Coach Smith, Coach Guthridge, Frank McGuire, the totality of what Carolina basketball has done in its existence. But it was like Roy Williams was the face of all that for me as a young fan. I fell in love with basketball in 3rd grade, fell in love in basketball with Carolina basketball in the 6th grade. And like when I say that it's been my life since then, like I wish I could be hyperbolic and exaggerate. You've been my best friend since 6th grade. You can attest to it's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Like and whether that's good, bad, I don't know. My identity rests within what that program does 40 nights out of the year on a basketball court. And so when Roy retired, questioned all that, like what is this going to look like moving forward? Obviously, I had a podcast. We write a blog. I cover the program day in, day out. I work in a sports media market that we cover college basketball. We talk college basketball as much as anywhere probably in the country. So this was going to be an evolving thing. And that kid reminded me that even as an adult, I could still connect and feel about Carolina the way that I want to feel, knowing that we live in a time where players don't stay 4 years. And it's not because they're going pro, it's because they're transferring to another school. Knowing that, okay, they're coming back, and maybe because they want to be here, but there's going to be a paycheck that comes along with that. And RJ certainly had his opportunity to make his money, but he had his opportunity to go pro. He has the opportunity to go transfer. He could have done whatever he wanted. And at a day and time where people leave, he chose to stay. Because that's what Carolina basketball is. And I still believe in the fabric of it in this ever-changing climate that we live in right now, not of college basketball. And so for that, I will be forever grateful. And, I look forward to the day where I've got my son, my daughter, we're in whatever arena Carolina's playing basketball in. They look up in the rafters, they see number 4, and they say, well, tell me about this Davis guy. And then I'll be able to remember, the game against Baylor where the goggle celebration became the goggle celebration.
Mm-hmm.
The game against Miami where he scored 42 points to set the Smith Center record. Being in the arena for some of his legendary games and some of his big moments, getting to cover him in an NCAA tournament, getting to cover him in an ACC tournament. And so, I know for some Carolina fans, we all connect with different players differently. For me, he's my second favorite Tar Heel of all time. Because there's, for me, there's a different connection to him back to this program that means so much. And so, I cannot wait to see him get honored the way that he gets honored or deserves to be honored and celebrated the way that he deserves to be celebrated. So today is tough. It's hard. Not the way I wanted to see his career go out, but I look back on it as nothing but positive. It's some of the best 5 years of my fandom as a Carolina fan, and cannot wait to see just the way this university will celebrate him in the future, because that jersey will be in the rafters and he will be honored forever and ever in Carolina basketball lore. Let's get back into the game just really quickly. Just kind of all over the place tonight, but that's kind of what happens when you lose in the tournament, because no, we're not players, but there's a lot of emotion that comes out of us because we put a lot of time, we put a lot of effort into covering this team, and when it comes to an end the way that it ends, there's a lot that we got to kind of process, and we're doing so in real time as well. So, first off, man, haven't heard anything about Jalen Withers. What a tough way for him to go out. I pray that, excuse me, it's nothing terrible. It looked scary in real life.
Mm-hmm.
It looked scary on a replay, and I think that's another thing where you can be proud of Carolina for getting back into this, because this man, this guy had been at the forefront of helping Carolina get to where they got, and did not play his best today, but he was fighting his tail off, and I know he would have much rather been on the court with Carolina as opposed to off the court. Haven't heard anything about it, but just really hope Jalen Withers is okay, because that ankle injury, it was pretty scary.
Yeah, you talk about things that impacted the game, and in the second half, I think his absence, was felt early in that second half. Carolina, still was lacking that guy that could truly score the ball from the 4 spot. And who knows, maybe if he's out there late in the game, Drake Powell doesn't have to take that late 3 that he gets. I mean, that's just the situation that Carolina ends up getting into. But yeah, I mean, you hate that for him. And I mean, yeah, we were hoping for a better ending, especially with how it looked like it was going to end against Duke. And the injury is not what we were envisioning. We thought for sure this was going to be a guy that would play down to the last minute. You talk about the rebounding advantage that Ole Miss had. Yeah, if he's on the floor, who knows if that rebounding advantage is there. He was one of Carolina's best rebounders down the stretch. I think that he is one of the most valuable pieces for this team when you look back on how did the season turn around. He's one of the guys that you really have to point to. I think it's him and it's Vin Allen Lubin. And if without those guys, Carolina doesn't turn this season around. So, of course, wishing him the best and really just, continuing to praise Vin Allen Lubin. I think this dude, you look at today and you can get on him for getting in foul trouble if you want to. I thought the officiating for the most part today was inconsistent. Really made me wonder if we had an ACC crew that was doing this game, but it was just weird, man. This is the type of games that Ole Miss has played all year long, and Carolina gets into one of these games where a bunch of fouls are going to be called, and that really made a difference in this game because, yeah, when you lose him, I mean, you're talking about a guy that scored 14 points in this game, was 6 of 7 overall from the field, 2 of 2 from the line, so made both free throws when Carolina needed him to make both free throws after the first half where it seemed like no one, the guards included, could not make free throws. So, I thought he definitely stepped up again today. Just wish he would have been out on the floor for more than 16 minutes because he would have been able to make a difference, I believe, in this game. And it forced Carolina to have to change things around. And that's where the loss of Jalen Withers was really bad because without him, then Carolina has to turn to Jalen Washington almost exclusively. And I mean, look, give credit to Jalen Washington down the stretch of the game. He stepped it up a little bit. But, yeah, there were still many times where he was getting pushed around on the inside, where the way that Vin Allen Lubin had been playing down the stretch of the season, you feel like he potentially would have been able to give you a little bit more there. So that I think both of those absences for Carolina in this game really hurt. I mean, both guys only played 16 minutes, and without them on the floor, Carolina looked like a much different team. They ended up having to go much smaller, and I think that's part of the reason why Ole Miss was able to dominate on the glass the way that they were.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time about complaining about the officiating. I'll say this. You would have thought that was a game between a power conference opponent and a mid-major the way it was officiated. As unfavorable a whistle as I think Carolina could have gotten this afternoon. All 4 of Lubin's fouls were not fouls. At least they're not fouls, in my opinion, in the first round of the NCAA tournament against 2 teams from a power conference. Now, I'm not an official, but I've watched enough basketball to know what is a foul and what isn't a foul. And we all know that the game gets officiated differently in March than it does in the regular season. And credit Ole Miss for attacking him and putting him in those situations. But I thought there was a lot of contact that Carolina was not allowed to make, and there was a lot of a contact that Ole Miss was allowed to create. And one guy whistled for a foul, and one did not.
Well, hell, the one time the contact is initiated by the Ole Miss player, Seth Trimble falls down because of the contact, and he gets called for the foul. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. There was no consistency to the whistles. But don't get it wrong. That is not the reason that Carolina was down by 18. That's the thing that you have to stress is that, yes, the officiating was poor, and we've dealt with that really the entire season. But it shouldn't matter, man. You shouldn't get down by that much in a game against a team like Ole Miss, who, yeah, is good offensively. But, I mean, there were things that you should have been able to take advantage of. And, I mean, you go back to that first half, man. Carolina, I know the second half was really where there were some egregious misses at the rim that you're going to remember. There in that one stretch in particular, you had RJ Davis missed one at the rim, and then Seth Trimble had another finish inside late in the game that if Carolina makes either one of those, who knows how the results end up falling. But, I mean, in that first half, there were some easy looks on the inside that Carolina just wasn't able to finish. Those are the things that are going to stick with me a little bit more than the officiating from this game.
Well, and, I mean, look about the free throws. Not only just the fact that, you left 5 points at the line. Some of them were situational. You missed 2 front end of 1-on-1s.
Yep.
Where you're, that's so effectively that's a turnover. Like it doesn't go down in the stat sheet as one. Effectively, you turn the ball over. It's those. Hubert Davis talks about the little things, the details. Those things become so magnified. A, once you get into the tournament, and B, once you play deeper into it. And I think another thing today, I got confident that when Carolina beat Wake Forest in the ACC tournament, and they won that game shooting 34%, I talked about how that's a good thing. Like, you got to be able to win games when you don't shoot the ball well. This team shot, 38% from the field. They were 21% from 3. And that was ultimately their undoing. Quality teams win games in March when they don't put the ball in the basket like they have for the majority of the season. Like, if you make a run, you're going to have to win a game more than likely where you shoot it better and where you don't shoot it as well as you have all year in your recent 10 games, whatever it is. And Carolina cannot do that today. Ole Miss played a 1-2-2 zone that I thought very creative, executed very well. It forced a lot of perimeter shots.
Yep.
Forced a lot of perimeter shots for guys that don't need to shoot the ball on the perimeter. And it took Carolina a little bit of time to combat that. So, and that was what this team was the first 4 months of the year. They were not capable of winning games when they didn't shoot the ball well. And I think that's why, like, as disappointing as this is, as frustrating as this is, there's not a more fitting way to go out. Like, this was Carolina's season in a nutshell, from the Kansas loss, which was the first loss of the year, to this loss, which is the final loss of the year. Where, I mean, we watched this game 14 times. And that's not a good thing, but there was not a more, I think, fitting way, a more appropriate way for the season to go out. Um, so, is there anything else from the game you want to talk about before we get to some last second stuff before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I mean, the only other thing that I would bring up along the same lines as the shooting is the 3-point shooting. I mean, 5 makes in this game. You're 5 of 24. You shoot 20%. I mean, simply not gonna help you. And even down the stretch of this game, where Carolina started to get back into it, I mean, the thing is that they were doing a lot of it at the rim. They were doing a lot of it by getting to the foul line. Even though they only got to the foul line 6 times, they got there in crucial moments. I mean, this team was 2 of 13 in the second half from deep. And that's an area where maybe if you have Jalen Withers, things are a little bit different. But, I mean, there were so many shots, even in that first half, where the ball is halfway down and ends up coming out. Carolina needed a really, really good shooting day against a team in Ole Miss that was going to be able to shoot the ball well. And, yeah, you said it. They finished the game shooting just 24 of 54, which is just a 44% clip. But it's still better than what Carolina shot. And the difference in made threes, you go back to that game against Wake Forest, and the reason why Carolina is able to win that game is because they make 8 threes in that game, which if Carolina makes 8 threes today, they end up winning this game. But the other thing was they were so good on the perimeter defensively. Carolina, that was one of the biggest issues that they had in the first half, was they just could not run these guys off the 3-point line. A lot of really open looks because Carolina was either going under screens or simply just wasn't communicating and a guy was wide open. And then in the most important defensive possession of the game, when it's 66-64, a guy who really laid it out on the line every game defensively this season. You can question some of the things that he did. You can, just like in the instance that I'm going to talk about here in a second, but you never questioned the intensity that Seth Trimble brought to the defensive end of the floor. He goes underneath the screen instead of going over a screen. It makes it a much easier shot for Sean Padula, gives him just enough room. And the guy that was hot in the second half of this game, he scored 14 points in the second half. And really, it just felt like could not miss in the crucial moments. I mean, 5 of 7 in that second half. That's ultimately your undoing. So I think 3-point shooting, a big difference in this game for Carolina, and one of the big reasons that we're sitting here talking about Carolina's season being over.
Yep. I completely agree with all that. I thought that mistake to go under the screen gave him just enough room to get the shot off. He puts the ball in the bucket, and that was effectively the nail in the coffin for Carolina in the game and the season. And, again, discipline details. I think when this staff goes back and reviews the film will show a lot of, if you do this better on these possessions, this is a different outcome, and we're having a different season, and we're still playing basketball, but we're not. And that's the reality of the situation. I do think, not that it matters, but I do think that Carolina did justify their tournament selection by what they did on Tuesday night in Dayton. And, they may have been the favorite to beat Ole Miss from the bettors, but an 11 seed's not supposed to beat the 6. Like, their season from a seed perspective was supposed to end today. And it did. Which leads us to just a brief conversation about what's next. Hubert Davis was asked at the end of his media availability about the portal opening on Monday. He obviously just gave a non-answer. But we know that things are different now. Carolina has a GM. They're going to put together, they're still in the process of putting together basically a front office that's going to help evaluate and bring in talent for Hubert Davis and this coaching staff. If he follows his practice from a year ago, Carolina lost in the Sweet 16 round on Thursday. The portal by that point was already open, of course. He waited until Monday to start meeting with players and start going through the process of, who's going to transfer out, while, of course, starting to find the talent, of course, who he wants to bring in. A lot of questions on this roster. You know that you're losing RJ. You know that you're losing Jay Witt. You know you're losing Ty Claude. Just initial thoughts on where you think Carolina is at, because when this bus or when this plane lands back in Raleigh and they get back on campus, the transfer portal is going to be right on the eve of opening up, and I think we expect a handful of numbers from Carolina to enter, but also expect Carolina to be very active once it opens on Monday, trying to overhaul, restock this talent with the roster capable of winning an ACC championship and competing for a national championship.
Yeah, I think that's the expectation, is that you're going to go out and hit that transfer portal hard. The evaluations start now. There are guys that are already in the transfer portal that you should be able to evaluate and officially should be able to contact when the portal opens. But I think Carolina's probably already got some of those guys on their radar. I would imagine that Jim Tanner has already taken a look at certain guys, especially a couple of the big guys that entered the transfer portal. And I would imagine that he has already got some of those marked down as guys that they're going to want to reach out to. Hubert Davis will probably jump in on that conversation too. And they'll be looking to find guys that'll be able to help them next season. I'd imagine that there's still some work to be done with the front office staff. They're probably going to hire a few more guys, some guys that will be talent evaluators. I think it's going to be built very similarly to what we see from the football program, where you've got one guy who is the GM, but you do have 2-3 other guys. I don't think it'll need to be nearly as big as football, because, football, you're evaluating way more players. I mean, the amount of offers that they hand out in the football class is around like 200-300, depending on who your coach is. Not handing that much out on the basketball side of things. So you'd imagine a little bit smaller, but they're going to get some help in here for Jim Tanner as well as Hubert Davis to be able to scout these guys. And then honestly, one key step that we can't really skip over, and I think that they got to start this weekend, is they got to evaluate this staff, man. They got to figure out whether or not this is the right staff, if this is the right combination of guys that can honestly get it done. I think that we've seen some good things from this staff at times. I really do like Marcus Page as a young guy that's on this staff. He's a guy that's learning, coached the JV team this year. So for me, I think he's a guy that's guaranteed to stay on the staff. Everybody else, I think, needs to be seriously evaluated. I think especially Sean May is going to be the guy that's under the microscope, because he is the guy that coaches the bigs. You look and, yeah, you had Armando Bacot, but where is the development from Jalen Washington? Vin Allen Lubin, it took him a little bit of time to get acclimated. You could see the growth as the season went along. But I guess you can ask the question, where was that earlier in the season from him? Where is the growth from the guys that were on this roster? So I think that's going to be a big talking point for Carolina as well, is can this coaching staff, is this the staff right now, the one that's in place, that's going to get Carolina where they ultimately want to go? I think that's a big part of the conversation, on top of the transfer portal and evaluating your own roster to determine, frankly, who you want here next year and who you think needs to be heading into the transfer portal for you to get someone in here that is better than them, so that you're not in this same spot again next year.
Yeah, I think Carolina is going to be very aggressive overhauling this roster, just like they were 2 years ago. Because if you go back and listen to Hubert Davis's tone on his radio show Monday, the day after Carolina makes the tournament, there wasn't anything happy coming out of his voice. Like, it was disappointment that he was having to coach in Dayton. That's where the program was after starting preseason top 10. And so I think they'll be motivated because they'll be better equipped to recruit right away to, I think, get the big man that they need, because I think you expect Jalen Washington to transfer out, to get a guard to replace RJ Davis, just because you're bringing in 2 talented guards, but you got to replace your second all-time leading scorer. It's easier to do that with a transfer as opposed to relying on on 2 freshmen. So, I think Carolina will be active, offering guys left and right, contacting guys left and right, because I think they're really going to try to rebuild this roster like the way they were able to do 2 years ago. The staff, I think, is going to be the biggest thing, because we know how loyal Hube is to his guys. We know what he wants in his assistants. And look, I don't think Brad Frederick's going anywhere. That's his right-hand man. I don't think Jeff Lebo is going anywhere either. I think, there's a relationship that Lebo has with the backcourt guys that you don't want to lose that. I don't know. Is Sean May the best big man coach that Carolina can employ? I don't think so. Like, we love Mondo. Where did Armando develop as a basketball player in his 5 years? Where did Vin Allen Lubin develop in his time this year at Carolina? Like, I think there's more room for growth in that area. I don't know if Pat Sullivan has been the payoff that we were being sold on when they brought him in after spending 18 years in the NBA. So I think that's going to be one where we got to figure out how all this stuff works out under this new head coach GM dynamic. If Hubert's willing to change his staff, that's how you know that if you're not in on Hubert, you should be in on him, because he doesn't want to fire people. He doesn't want to fire, these guys that he has these long-lasting relationships with. But if he's willing to do it, I think that really does speak volumes about where Carolina is at. All in all, this sets up for maybe not as interesting as an offseason 2 years ago, because you're not in as bad as a spot as you were then. I mean, you went from preseason number 1 to miss the tournament. This year you go from preseason top 10 to losing in the first round. Albeit you still win a tournament game in the first 4. But this is a pivotal offseason, because year 5 is make or break for Hubert Davis. And so
most pressure-packed offseason, honestly, that we have probably ever seen at Carolina. Because if this fails this offseason, this more than likely means the end of Hubert Davis in Chapel Hill. It's going to be weird, because you're only going to have 1 year with a GM, and you could say that it's going to take more time for that to pay off. But I think this coming year is going to be it for him. If he wins, if he gets Carolina back to the level that they need to be, then people will be satisfied. He will hold on to his job. If he doesn't, and I mean, we could be talking about even being in the same place that we are right now, then I think that might be it. And so that makes this offseason incredibly important. You are losing a lot of guys, even from this year's group. Even though this wasn't the greatest group, you are losing a lot of guys, and you're losing some key guys, especially in a guy like RJ Davis. So now you've got to go out and find a scoring guard. I mean, you can ride with Ian Jackson and think that he's going to be that guy. To me, I want someone that's proven too. If Ian Jackson steps up and can be that guy, that's fine. But you need to go out and find someone that can score the ball, preferably from that one guard spot. That can go along with Elliot Cadeau or potentially replace him. I think that's something that you've got to take a serious look at. And then you've got to go out and find that big man. You've got to find that guy in the middle that can handle the physicality inside, brings the size that you need, and potentially stretches the floor, depending on how you want to run your lineup. Do you want to go back to basically running 2 bigs? Is Vin Allen Lubin just too good not to play on the floor? All I know is he can't be your starting 5. He just doesn't have the size to be able to succeed at that starting 5 position. So they need to really hammer that home this offseason and find those guys, because that is going to be the ultimate make or break for Hubert Davis. And the thing is that we're hopefully going to see the NIL influx. We're not seeing that big number just yet, But I would imagine by some point there will be a revelation that there is some money coming into the program. Now it's about what does the program actually do with that money that they're getting? Because, yeah, the roster construction this year simply wasn't good enough. I thought that in the offseason. I was concerned with how this roster was built. This offseason, we better go in feeling like this is a team that the floor is a Sweet 16 and the ceiling is a potential national championship.
Yeah, look, I've been told off the record multiple times from multiple people the money is going to be there, because they're not going to make the changes that they've made off the court and not give the money that you need to get the talent here. So just because that money isn't made public doesn't mean that the money is not going to be made available to Carolina. Here's my message that we'll close with. For all of you that are rooting for Hubert Davis to fail, don't come here looking to hear that sentiment echoed. I am going to tell you right now, this is a pro Hubert Davis podcast. And if you've got a problem with that, then maybe we reevaluate your standing on the podcast as well, because this is the right man for the job. And what confirmed that was what he did in a moment of loss. When Jalen Withers made that mistake in the biggest rivalry in sports that could have cost his season his team a chance to go to the tournament, Jalen Withers went to go face the media because that's what you're expected to do at Carolina. But he didn't have to do it alone because his head coach was right there. And for everything that Hubert Davis does wrong, every mistake that he's made, that's what I want in my head coach. And that's what Hubert Davis was and is that's a man that wins with grace, and that's a man that loses with class. And that's what Carolina basketball is. That's what I want Carolina basketball to be. I want to win with grace. I want to lose with class. And Hubert Davis does that as well as anybody that is in the profession right now. And so it is my prayer that he evaluates his staff. And if he feels like he's got to make a tough decision or two, he does it if it puts him in a better position to win basketball games moving forward. It is my prayer that Carolina reloads and restocks this roster so that it can win tough games in the non-conference and beat up on a bad ACC and win an ACC regular season title. It is my prayer that come Selection Sunday, Carolina isn't sweating out being a first four team in Dayton. We're talking about them being on the 1 or the 2 seed line and their path to the Final Four. That's my prayer. That's what I want for this offseason, is that whenever it all comes together and we have our roster finalized early June, late July, whatever it is, we are looking at a roster that is equipped to win 25-plus games and play into the second weekend of the tournament, if not deeper. That's what I want. That's what I expect. And I think Carolina is going to be aggressively pursuing that. And the good news is that we're going to be here with you every step of the way, covering this pivotal offseason, as Anthony mentioned. Probably the most pivotal offseason we've covered as a website and as a podcast. I wish I could tell you guys that we were going to take a break and have a chance to recharge. That's not the reality of the situation anymore when these seasons come to an end. Pre-portal, pre-NIL, when the season came to an end, we got a chance to catch our breaths and recharge. And God knows I need it. The last 2 weeks have been very, very draining. If you cannot see it in my eyes or tell it in my voice, your boy's tired. And he has not slept very much over the last 2 weeks and probably won't sleep much over the next week and a half, 2 weeks, as Carolina, I think, will really hit the ground running. But we'll have you covered on the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. The recap article for tonight's loss will be made available for you guys tomorrow. We always value podcast over article. I'll get that written up and posted for you guys if you want to read that. If you don't feel bad. I don't want to write it. I don't expect you to read it. But that will be made available for you guys tomorrow. And then from there, we're in the offseason mode. Any news and notes that come out for Carolina contacting guys in the portal, guys entering the portal. We'll have an article about every single portal entry anecdote that you can think of, so be on the lookout for all that. Anything NBA draft-wise, if Drake Powell, Ian Jackson go pro, we'll have you covered with all that as well. So really make sure you visit our website, HeelToughBlog.com, because this is really when the articles pick up even more so during the season, because we're into the news portion of the offseason, spring football underway as well for Bill Belichick and Carolina football. Anthony's been keeping you up to date on all that. So make sure you go to our website every single day. That's HeelToughBlog.com. And check there for the latest and the best Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the basketball now off season. Depending on how the news comes out, will depend on if we're live on here doing portal stuff or if we're doing an audio version of the podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the podcast will not slow down. We'll still be doing, I'd imagine, 1 or 2 a week for the foreseeable future. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. Before we sign off, just want to thank you guys for an incredible season. This is episode 114 that we've done for what I consider season 4 of the Four Corners Podcast. So that dates back to right before the season officially got underway to where we are now. This has been the most success we've had as a podcast in terms of, online viewership, in terms of downloads. And we cannot thank you enough. A lot of great things happened for the pod this year. We got to do a live show in Chapel Hill. I got the experience to cover the ACC tournament, which brings a different perspective to when we recap those games for you guys just a week ago. And so, we cannot thank you enough. Incredibly humbled by the support you continue to show us. And it's honestly, guys, it's why we work the way that we work. Like, I don't mean to brag. I don't mean to pat ourselves on the back, but we make no money doing this. But it means that much to us. We're that passionate that we work full-time jobs and then we juggle this around it. And it's why we're up till this time of the year, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, watching games, doing research to prepare a podcast for you guys. And the same thing during football season as well. So I just wanted to thank you guys. We hope you stick with us through the off season, because it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of content, but this was the best season we've had as a podcast. I just wanted to thank you guys for all the love and support that you've shown us. We can't wait to see what season 5 will have in store for us when we kick that off later this year. So with that, guys, this is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank all of you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.